I want to go back to what I asked you before. Your solicitation of witnesses yielded some affidavits from people, sworn affidavits, that you yourself determined are clearly false and spam, as you phrased it, correct?
That's correct.
The affidavits that you have submitted are the ones that you could not prove are false. So am I correct in saying you solicited affidavits, you received some you could prove were false, and you set those aside. The ones that you couldn't prove are false, you have submitted to the court?
Correct. They were submitted under penalty of perjury. Yes.
But the affidavits that you yourself found to be false were also submitted under penalty of perjury, right?
Correct. Improperly.
The fact that your process for obtaining these affidavits yielded affidavits that you yourself found to be false does not support a finding that this process generates reliable evidence. This is concerning. The fact that you solicited affidavits, some you know are false, some you don't know if they're false or not, and you exclude the ones that you can prove are false and submit the others. How is that a reliable process of gathering evidence? If your process for gathering declarations has yielded sworn statements under oath that your investigation has determined to be false, that doesn't give me any reason to believe that your process is one that generates trustworthy affidavits. It simply generated affidavits that you can't prove are not true. That's not the same as being trustworthy. And anything else you'd like to say?
No, Your Honor.
This is from a courtroom in Maricopa County, Arizona, where the Trump campaign was hoping to stop the certification of the election results. And they opted to do so by submitting affidavits that the Trump campaign itself admitted were rife with spam. They were able to throw away the ones that they confirmed were false, but the others that eventually made it to the courtroom were only able to be considered not definitely false, which is to say that there was no way to determine if they were true, only that they weren't absolutely false, which is not exactly the standard you want to bring into a courtroom. And the reason they were so unreliable is because they came from a web forum hunting for evidence of fraud. And the big safeguard to prevent fraud in that web forum? A CAPTCHA, which is basically a tool designed to distinguish humans from bots. It's when you have to type in a few letters or numbers from a picture or click on the boxes with traffic lights in them. That was their solution to weed out unreliable affidavits. So if I wanted to submit a bogus affidavit, all I'd need to be able to do was to identify the letters in the alphabet and write what I wanted. And as long as they couldn't disprove what I wrote, then it'd be entered as evidence in a courtroom. Yeah, sounds like a pretty airtight system to me. By the way, this was the same case that began as the Sharpiegate lawsuit that exploded across right-wing media that was supposedly evidence of widespread fraud. Conservatives allege that election workers were handing markers to Trump voters to invalidate their votes on election day that would then bleed through and turn into overvotes and invalidate the ballot. Only it turned out, according to Maricopa County's Director of Election Day and Emergency Voting, that using markers did not lead to overvotes, and that the total number of actual organic overvotes in the county was a staggering 191 ballots. Not quite enough to compensate for Joe Biden's 10,000 vote lead in the state. And yet somehow, their day in court managed to get even worse, because the Trump campaign had apparently compiled a long list of Trump voters who had alleged that their votes hadn't been counted. Only when it was time to declare under oath if they had any basis to believe that their vote hadn't been counted, they admitted one by one that they did not. They replied, I'm not sure, no, I couldn't say, I don't know whether they were counted or not. In other words, what had been touted by the Trump campaign as some massive fraudulent election ended up being about whether 191 overvotes would be counted, and they were. Not exactly the grand conspiracy that Trump and Republicans had been hyping up for weeks on Fox News. And this has been a recurring theme throughout the entire post-election period. The Trump campaign is currently 2 for 33 in their election litigation. One case after the next has seen their conspiracy theories come crashing down as they were actually forced to show evidence for their absurd claims, as opposed to spouting baseless talking points on right-wing media networks. The simple fact is that the only reason these conspiracy theories exist on the right is because they're not being required to prove anything. And then once that proof is necessary, suddenly those conspiracy theories deflate. So my only advice is that when you hear Republicans prop up these incredible stories of mass fraud, realize that they have nothing to back it up. And despite what the Trump campaign would want you to think, proof matters, and so does the truth.